The year was 2045. The world was on the brink. A virus, a nightmare-made flesh, was tearing across the globe. It started quietly, a whisper in the heartland. Elkhart, Indiana, my hometown, now a breeding ground for the living dead. My name is Jacob Bergner. I'm a Marine, part of a special unit trained to combat supernatural threats. We were the wall between humanity and the abyss, and Elkhart was our next mission.
We need patient 0, alive.
A photo flickered on the screen. A young man with tired eyes and a hesitant smile. My brother, Philip. My stomach churned. This wasn't just another mission, it was personal. My team, my brothers in arms, were tense. Michael, enhanced with cybernetics, a machine of war disguised as a man. James, a sharpshooter, his aim as steady as his nerve. Brandon, a master of melee, his movements a blur of lethal grace. And Julian, our shield, able to conjure barriers out of thin air. We were soldiers, ready to face any enemy. But this was different. Elkhart. The very name brought back a flood of memories. Sunny days spent fishing with my dad, the smell of Mom's apple pie wafting from the kitchen window. Philip, always tinkering in the garage, dreaming of inventions. Now it was a graveyard. The streets were eerily silent, save for the moans of the infected. Homes stood empty, windows shattered, doors hanging open like broken jaws. The air was thick with the stench of decay, a grim reminder of the horror that had unfolded. We moved like ghosts, our boots crunching on the shattered remnants of a life we once knew. Every corner held the possibility of encountering them. The infected, our friends, our neighbors, twisted into monstrous parodies of their former selves. The mission was simple, on paper. Infiltrate Elkhart, locate patient 0, extract him. But the reality was far more complex. Every step was a tightrope walk between duty and despair, knowing that each encounter could force us to face the people we swore to protect. We were soldiers, yes, but we were also weapons. Each of us had been augmented, given abilities beyond human limits. Michael, with his cybernetic enhancements, was a one-man army. He moved with unnatural speed and strength, his punches capable of crumpling steel. James, our sniper, could place a bullet between a target's eyes from a mile away. His rifle, a custom-built masterpiece, was an extension of himself. Brandon, our close-quarters specialist, danced through the infected, his blades a whirlwind of death. Then there was Julian. His power was defense. He could summon a shimmering barrier, an impenetrable dome that shielded us from harm. And me? I was the wild card. I could turn anything I touched into an explosive device, a doorknob, a rock, even a blade of grass. In this twisted game, we were all pawns, but we were also the players. The weight of our abilities, the knowledge that we were fighting monsters with powers beyond human comprehension, was a heavy burden to bear. But we bore it, because it was our duty. We were the line in the sand. We were the hope in the darkness. We were the enhanced. The Humvee rumbled to a stop at the edge of town. A thick silence hung in the air, broken only by the distant moans of the infected. The wind whispered through the deserted streets, carrying with it the stench of decay and the faint echo of screams long gone silent. Elkhart, once a bustling town, now a ghost town. We checked our gear, the weight of our weapons a familiar comfort in the face of the unknown.
Scanning the rooftops, no movement detected.
Street ahead, clear. Chambering around.
Remember your training! General Dorman's voice crackled through our comms, a stark reminder of the gravity of our mission. Patient 0 is the top priority. Engage with extreme prejudice. His words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken warnings. We were soldiers, trained to follow orders. But this was different. This was Elkhart, our home. Every building, every street corner held a memory, a whisper of a life we once knew. And now, we were tasked with stepping back into that life, into a nightmare we could barely comprehend. We moved as one, shadows against the backdrop of the dying town. The streets were littered with debris, overturned cars, shattered glass, and the scattered remnants of lives torn apart. The air was thick with the silence of the dead, broken only by the crunching of our boots on the pavement. Each step was a journey back in time, each landmark a painful reminder of what we had lost. Miller's Pond, where we used to spend lazy summer days fishing, was now a stagnant pool, its surface reflecting the empty eyes of the infected that lurked in the shadows. We passed the skeletal remains of the town square, the clock tower frozen in time, its hands pointing accusingly at the moment everything changed. The bakery where my mom used to buy fresh bread, now a hollow shell, its windows shattered, the scent of decay replacing the sweet aroma of pastries. With each passing moment, the weight of our mission pressed down on us, heavy and suffocating. We weren't just soldiers fighting a war, we were sons returning to a graveyard, brothers forced to confront the ghosts of their past. The first encounter came without warning. A lone figure, its skin pallid, its eyes vacant and white, stumbled out from behind a dilapidated ice cream stand near Miller's Pond. Its clothes were torn, its flesh rotting, but the remnants of familiarity in its tattered remains were unmistakable. Mrs. Henderson, our old neighbor, she used to bring us cookies every Christmas. A choked sob escaped James's lips, the sound barely audible amidst the oppressive silence. He raised his rifle, his finger tightening on the trigger, but hesitated. We all did. The instinct to fight, to survive, warred with the haunting familiarity of the creature before us.
Don't hesitate. They're not human anymore. Remember your training. Remember your duty.
But it was too late. The scent of living flesh, a macabre beacon in the dead air, had attracted more of the infected. They emerged from the shadows, drawn by an insatiable hunger, their moans growing louder, more insistent, a chorus of the damned. We were surrounded.
Form a perimeter.
Brandon barked, his voice tight with tension. He moved with a grace that belied the danger, his twin karambit knives flashing in the fading light, drawing arcs of crimson across the infected that dared to get too close. Julian, his face pale but resolute, slammed his hands together, and a shimmering dome of energy erupted around us, deflecting the first wave of the infected like a wave crashing against an unyielding cliff. We were safe, for now. But the barrier wouldn't hold forever.
James, thin the herd.
Michael roared, his voice a thunderclap in the confined space. He charged into the fray, his cybernetically enhanced body a blur of motion, each blow a symphony of bone-crunching force. The air filled with the staccato rhythm of gunfire as James, his face a mask of grim determination, picked off the infected one by one, his aim unnervingly precise. But there were too many. They kept coming, a relentless tide of decaying flesh and insatiable hunger. And then, it happened. A stray infected, its movements uncoordinated but no less deadly, slammed into the barrier, its rotting hands clawing at the shimmering surface. The barrier flickered, weakened, and with a sickening crunch, the infected broke through. "Julian!" I screamed, my voice raw with terror. But it was too late. The infected, its eyes burning with a cold dead light, lunged at Julian, its teeth bared in a grotesque parody of a smile. There was a sickening crunch, a muffled cry, and then silence. The barrier, its anchor broken, dissipated into nothingness, leaving us exposed, vulnerable. Rage, primal and all-consuming, surged through me. I grabbed a handful of gravel, the rough stones digging into my palm, and hurled it at the infected that had taken Julian from us. The gravel exploded on contact, a blinding flash of light and heat that vaporized the infected, leaving behind only a faint wisp of smoke and the lingering stench of burnt flesh. But it was a small victory in the face of overwhelming odds.
We have to fall back.
Michael shouted, his voice barely audible above the snarls of the approaching horde. He grabbed Julian's lifeless body, his cybernetic arms straining under the weight, and we retreated, fighting our way through the relentless tide of the infected. We fought our way through the streets, the stench of decay clinging to us like a shroud. Brandon, his movements growing slower, his breaths labored, fought with the ferocity of a cornered animal, his blades a whirlwind of death, but it wouldn't be enough. We finally found refuge in the crumbling shell of what was once Elkhart High, our old school. The memories hit me like a physical blow, the laughter, the camaraderie, the hope of a future that now seemed like a distant dream.
There's gotta be another way out. We can't hold them off forever.
As if on cue, a section of the wall crumbled, revealing a hidden passageway leading down into the depths of the school, a glimmer of hope in the darkness. But as we moved towards the passage, a figure emerged from the shadows, its eyes glowing with an eerie light. It was Philip, My brother, but something was different. He wasn't infected, he was glowing.
Jacob, you shouldn't have come.
Philip turned, a chilling smile playing on his lips, and beckoned us towards the passageway.
Follow me, it's the only way.
His words hung in the air, a mix of promise and threat. We had no other choice. With the horde closing in, we plunged into the darkness, the familiar scent of decay replaced by something colder, more sterile. The passage was narrow, the air thick with dust and the faint hum of machinery. Michael led the way, his cybernetic eye cutting through the gloom, his hand hovering over the pistol strapped to his thigh. James, his rifle at the ready, covered our rear, his eyes darting nervously in the shadows. Brandon, his movements growing slower, leaned heavily on me, his strength ebbing with each passing moment. The passage twisted and turned, descending deeper into the bowels of the school. The air grew colder, the hum of machinery growing louder, more insistent. The smell of disinfectant mingled with the metallic tang of blood, creating a cloying, unsettling aroma.
Where are we? What is this place?
I don't know, I replied, my voice barely a whisper. But a chilling thought had taken root in my mind. This wasn't just a passageway. It was a tunnel leading to a place we weren't meant to find, a place where secrets were buried, and we were about to unearth them. The passage opened into a large cavernous chamber, the air thick with the hum of machinery and the faint scent of ozone. Banks of monitors flickered with static, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Metal catwalks crisscrossed the chamber, leading to different levels. In the center, bathed in a pool of harsh fluorescent light, was a massive metal structure, its surface covered in wires and tubes. It looked like something out of a nightmare, a twisted parody of a science lab. The horde had followed us, their moans echoing in the vast chamber, their silhouettes grotesque against the flickering lights. They surged towards us, a wave of decaying flesh driven by an insatiable hunger. We were trapped.
Michael, take point.
Brandon roared, his voice hoarse but firm. He pushed himself away from me, his twin karambit knives flashing in the artificial light as he charged into the fray. He moved with a desperate fury, his blades a whirlwind of death, cutting down the infected that dared to get too close, but he was outnumbered, outmatched, and he was tiring.
We need to reach that structure.
James, his face pale but resolute, took aim and fired, his rifle spitting fire and thunder into the horde. Each shot found its mark, but there were too many. They kept coming, relentless, unstoppable.
It's our only chance.
Michael shouted, his cybernetic arm firing a grappling hook towards the metal catwalk above. The grappling hook caught with a satisfying clang, and Michael, with a surge of cybernetic strength, pulled himself up towards the catwalk. He reached down, his free hand outstretched.
Jacob, you're next.
He yelled, his voice barely audible above the snarls of the infected and the staccato rhythm of gunfire. I hesitated for a moment, my eyes darting between Michael's outstretched hand and the horde that was closing in on us. We were out of time. I took a deep breath, grabbed Michael's hand, and he hauled me up onto the catwalk. The catwalk swayed precariously beneath our weight, the metal groaning in protest. Below us, the horde surged and thrashed, their moans echoing in the vast chamber. The air was thick with the stench of decay and the metallic tang of blood, but amidst the horror, a glimmer of hope. As we made our way across the catwalk, I noticed something on the monitors. A single image flickered amidst the static, a face frozen in time. It was Philip, but he wasn't infected. He was strapped to the metal structure in the center of the chamber, wires and tubes snaking out from his body, his chest rising and falling with each shallow breath. "He's alive," I whispered, my voice barely audible above the din. We reached the end of the catwalk, a metal gantry overlooking the metal structure where Philip was strapped. Below us, James and Brandon fought back to back, their movements growing slower, their breaths labored. They were buying us time, but it wouldn't be enough.
We have to get to him.
I yelled, my voice tight with urgency. But as I moved towards the gantry's edge, a blinding pain shot through my leg. I looked down to see a metal spike protruding from my thigh, a booby trap.
Jacob!
Michael shouted, his hand reaching for me, but it was too late. The gantry, weakened by years of neglect, gave way beneath me, and I plunged towards the horde below. As I fell, time seemed to slow down. I saw the faces of the infected, their eyes burning with a cold, dead light, their mouths open in silent screams. I saw the fear on James and Brandon's faces as they reached for me, their hands grasping at empty air. And then everything went black. When I regained consciousness, I was lying on the cold, hard floor of the chamber. The air was thick with the stench of decay and the metallic tang of blood. The horde was all around me, their moans a cacophony of horror. And then I saw them. James and Brandon, their lifeless eyes staring up at the uncaring ceiling, their bodies ripped and torn, surrounded by a sea of decaying flesh. They had sacrificed themselves to save me. The grief hit me like a physical blow, doubling me over, stealing my breath. But there was no time for mourning, not yet. I had to reach Philip. He was the key to all of this, he had to be. I stumbled to my feet, my legs screaming in protest, and limped towards the metal structure. The horde parted before me as if sensing something different in me, something they couldn't quite comprehend. Or perhaps they were just distracted by the carnage they had wrought. I reached the structure and collapsed to my knees, my hand reaching out to touch my brother's face. His skin was cold, clammy, but he was alive. I could feel the faint thrum of his pulse beneath my fingertips. "Philip," I whispered, my voice hoarse with exhaustion and grief. "I'm here, it's Jacob."
Jacob? He croaked, his voice barely a whisper. What's happening?
"I don't know," I replied, my voice thick with emotion. "But we're going to get through this, together." For now, we were safe. The metal structure, whatever it was, seemed to be keeping the horde at bay. But for how long? And what awaited us outside this subterranean nightmare? The answers, I feared, would be far more terrifying than the horrors we had already faced. Philip's eyes flickered with recognition, a flicker of the brother I knew, before the nightmare, before Elkhart became a graveyard.
Jacob, he rasped, his voice thin and weak. What are you doing here?
"We came for you," I said, my hand gripping his. His skin felt cold, clammy, unnatural, but he was alive, that's all that mattered. "We're taking you home."
He coughed, a rattling sound that sent chills down my spine. Home? Elkhart is gone, Jacob. Don't you see? It's all gone.
I looked around the chamber. The flickering monitors, the cold, sterile metal, the air thick with the stench of decay and something else. Something alien. He was right. This place was the opposite of home. It was a tomb. "This isn't home," I said, my voice firm despite the tremor in my chest. "But we'll find our way back. We always do." A low groan echoed through the chamber, drawing my attention back to the horde. They pressed against the metal structure, their moans a hungry chorus. They sensed us, they sensed him. Michael moved like a phantom, his cybernetic limbs a blur as he scanned the chamber. His one human eye, hardened by years of war, held a flicker of fear. Even he, the machine, felt it. The shift in the air, the approaching storm.
"This place is wrong," he said, his voice low and urgent. "There's something else here, something worse."
The air crackled with energy, a high-pitched whine slicing through the chamber. Red lights flashed, bathing the metal structure in an eerie glow. A mechanical voice, cold and emotionless, boomed through hidden speakers. Mechanical voice. "Warning. Failsafe activated. Containment breach imminent." "What the hell does that mean?" I shouted, my voice lost in the echoing chamber. "Michael, what's happening?" He didn't answer. He was staring at the metal structure, his jaw clenched, his one human eye wide with a horror I'd never seen before. The horror of understanding. The metal floor beneath the structure groaned, splitting open with a deafening screech. A hiss like 1,000 serpents filled the air as a sickly green vapor rose from the chasm, acid, corrosive, deadly.
Jacob, get back!
I screamed, my voice raw with panic, but it was too late. He was too close, too focused on the horde that still pressed against the other side of the structure. He turned, his face a mask of confusion, just as the acid geyser erupted, engulfing him in a wave of toxic green. His scream, cut short, echoed through the chamber, a scream that would haunt my nightmares.
"Jacob!"
Michael reacted instantly, his cybernetic arm shooting out to grab me, pulling me back from the edge of the abyss. The gantry shuddered beneath us, threatening to buckle under the strain. We were running out of time.
"We have to get Philip out of here."
I yelled, my voice hoarse with grief and terror.
"Now!"
The acid ate through the metal restraints holding Philip, freeing him from the structure just as it started to collapse into the churning abyss. I caught him as he fell, his body light, fragile.
We have to go.
Michael said, his voice strained as he fought to maintain his balance on the crumbling gantry.
There's nothing left for us here.
I looked down at the horde, their moans echoing in the chamber, their hunger a palpable force. And then I looked at Philip, his eyes glazed with pain and confusion. My brother. He needed me.
Just get us out of here, Michael.
I said, my voice firm despite the tremor in my chest.
Get us out of this nightmare.
He nodded, his face grim, and with a surge of cybernetic strength he pulled us onto a relatively stable section of the gantry. We had to get out, we had to survive, for James, for Elkhart, for the memory of home. The monitors lining the chamber flickered and died, plunging us into darkness. Only the eerie green glow of the acid and the flashing red of the emergency lights illuminated our desperate escape. The air crackled with static, a symphony of dying electronics and impending doom.
This way,
Michael said, his voice tight with urgency. He led us through a maze of catwalks and corridors, his cybernetic eye piercing the gloom, his hand hovering over his pistol. The air grew colder, the stench of decay replaced by the sterile smell of ozone and something else, something metallic, sharp, the smell of blood.
What was that place? Why was I there?
It doesn't matter now.
We're getting you out of here. That's all that matters.
But even as I spoke, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking into a trap. The silence was too perfect, the air too still. Something was waiting for us. I could feel it in my bones. We burst through a heavy steel door, the words "emergency exit" barely visible in the flickering red light. The cool night air hit us like a wave, carrying with it the scent of rain and something else. Hope. Michael pointed to a lone helicopter, its rotors already spinning, the pilot waving frantically from the cockpit. Our ride out of this nightmare. But as we ran towards the helicopter, a voice boomed through a loudspeaker, echoing across the abandoned airfield. A voice that sent chills down my spine. General Ramirez, S1, media, military officer pointing, intense command situation. There!
Michael Jacob, report. We've received your transmission. What is your status?
We've located patient 0, requesting immediate extraction.
A tense silence followed. Then, the general's voice, filled with a grave weight, echoed again.
Negative on extraction, Michael. The virus, it's gone global. There's no one left to send.
My blood ran cold. No one left? What did that even mean? Before I could speak, the general's voice, filled with a new urgency, cut through the static.
Philip is the key, Jacob. He's the only one immune. Get him to Tampa. The last stand is there. Godspeed, soldiers.
The transmission ended with a sharp click. Tampa. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble, but it was all we had left. The air crackled with the stench of decay, a nauseating perfume heralding the horde's approach. They surged towards us, a tide of broken flesh and insatiable hunger, their moans a symphony of despair. We were trapped between the decaying jaws of the world we once knew, and the cold, unforgiving steel of the helicopter that represented our only hope of escape. Michael, a chrome angel of death, stood his ground, his cybernetic arm a blur as he fired round after round into the oncoming horde. Each bullet found its mark, tearing through flesh and bone, but for every infected that fell, 2 more seemed to take its place. They were relentless, driven by a hunger that eclipsed all reason, all humanity.
Go, get Philip to the helicopter. I'll buy you some time.
We can't just leave you here, I shouted back, my hand instinctively reaching for the pistol at my hip. But even as I spoke, I knew it was a futile gesture. We were outmatched, outgunned. Our only hope lay in escape. Philip, his eyes wide with a terror that mirrored my own, stumbled towards the helicopter, his legs unsteady beneath him. He was weak, still recovering from whatever experiments they had subjected him to in that lab. He needed my help. He needed us both. I grabbed Philip's arm, hauling him towards the helicopter, the sound of Michael's gunfire a fading echo behind us. The horde pressed in, their moans growing louder, their rotting hands reaching for us, eager to drag us down into the abyss.
Faster, Philip. We have to get out of here.
But as we reached the helicopter's open door, a searing pain ripped through my side. I looked down to see a bloody gash, the unmistakable mark of claws? Teeth? I hadn't even seen it coming.
Jacob!
Get in the damn helicopter, Philip! I roared, shoving him towards the open door. Go, now! He hesitated, his eyes darting between me and the horde that was closing in. He was torn, I knew, between self-preservation and loyalty, between the brother he barely knew and the monster he might become. And then, with a final desperate look, he scrambled into the helicopter, the door slamming shut behind him. I watched as the helicopter lifted off, its rotors churning the air, the sound of its engine a deafening roar against the backdrop of the approaching horde. They swarmed the airfield, their moans a chorus of hunger and despair, their eyes burning with a cold, dead light. They had won. They had taken everything from me.
You should have left me.
I felt a cold hand on my shoulder, a touch that sent chills down my spine. I turned to see Michael, his cybernetic eye glowing with an eerie red light, his face a mask of cold fury.
We're a team, remember? We live together, we die together.
He raised his pistol, his finger tightening on the trigger.
Besides, I have a feeling this is just the beginning.
And then, the horde was upon us, a wave of decaying flesh and insatiable hunger swallowing us whole. The last thing I saw before the darkness claimed me was Michael's face, illuminated by the eerie red glow of his cybernetic eye, a look of grim determination etched on his features. We were going down fighting, together. But to what end? What awaited us on the other side of oblivion? The answers, I feared, were best left unknown. The helicopter dipped low, dodging a flock of birds that scattered in a flurry of feathers. They were fleeing the city, I realized, just like us, fleeing the stench of death, the relentless advance of the horde, fleeing the end of the world as we knew it.
Michael, come in, do you copy?
Silence. Only the relentless drone of the engine and the distant moans of the infected answered his plea. My heart sank. Michael. He had sacrificed himself so we could escape, a chrome angel buying time for two broken souls. The thought brought a fresh wave of grief, a bitter cocktail of guilt and gratitude.
Michael, please respond. We can't do this without you.
But deep down, I knew the truth. Michael wasn't coming back. He was gone, lost in the maelstrom of that airfield, swallowed by the very nightmare we were trying to escape, and we were alone. I reached out, placing a hand on Philip's shoulder. He flinched at my touch, his body tense, his eyes still fixed on the radio headset. He was so fragile, so lost in the wreckage of our shattered world. He needed someone to guide him, to protect him. He needed his brother. He's gone, Philip. He's gone, but we're alive. We have to hold on to that. We have to... My voice trailed off, the words catching in my throat. What were we supposed to hold on to? What hope was there in a world overrun by the undead? Philip turned to me, his eyes red-rimmed, his face pale beneath a sheen of sweat. He looked so young, so vulnerable, the weight of the world resting heavy on his shoulders. He was the key, the general had said, the only one immune. But what good was immunity in a world where death was the only constant?
What do we do now? Where do we go?
His words hung in the air, heavy with the uncertainty that clouded our future. Tampa. The general had said it was our last stand, but what awaited us there? Salvation or annihilation? Hope or oblivion? I didn't have the answers. All I had was the echo of Michael's words, the ghost of his voice whispering in my ear. We lived together. We died together. We were in this together, Philip and I. Two brothers, bound by blood and circumstance, facing an uncertain future in a world gone mad. The helicopter soared south, a lone speck of metal and hope against the vast canvas of a dying world. Below us, the landscape unfolded, a tapestry woven from the threads of destruction and despair. Burned-out cities, deserted highways, forests choked with the silence of the dead. The world we knew was gone, replaced by a nightmare landscape ripped straight from our darkest fears. I glanced at Philip, who sat staring out the window, his gaze distant, his thoughts a mystery. What was he thinking, I wondered? What horrors replayed behind those haunted eyes? The lab, the experiments, the burden of his immunity. It was enough to break even the strongest spirit. He was the key, the general had said, the only one who could potentially stop this pandemic, find a cure, a way to reclaim our world from the clutches of the undead. But what if there was no cure? What if this was our new reality, a world ruled by death, where survival was a daily struggle against impossible odds? The helicopter dipped low, banking sharply as we approached a thick wall of storm clouds. Lightning flickered in the distance, illuminating the churning darkness within. A storm was brewing, both outside and within us. A storm of uncertainty, of fear, of the unknown. And as we plunged into the heart of the tempest, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were flying towards our destiny, a destiny shrouded in darkness where hope and despair waged a constant war, and the only certainty was that the world would never be the same.